decade since the city of Cincinnati was in the national spotlight. A community angry following the death of an unarmed black man, shot dead running from police in Over the Rhine.
There was one shot fired by the officer.
The riots of April 2001, playing out over the course of several days.
I think I was genuinely fearful about what was going to happen to the city.
20 years later, we look at how far we've come.
I never thought I was going to see a black chief in the city of Cincinnati. I never thought I would have to serve under a black chief.
And the work we still need to do.
It's not about power and money. It's deeper than that.
And you need to communicate better and you need to be more transparent.
From WLWT, this is Let's Talk Cincy, presented by Western and Southern Financial Group. Put our financial strength behind you.
20 years since the death of 19-year-old Timothy Thomas sent shockwaves of anger, frustration, and chaos through the streets of Cincinnati. Hello, everyone. I'm Curtis Fuller. We will examine the events that changed our city forever. But we're not just going to look back. We also want to look forward at the hope for justice and unity. We'll hear from several community voices about where we stand when it comes to fair policing and accountability and the hurdles that still lie ahead. First, we need to remember where this all began. The city was already dealing with the deaths of several African-American men by Cincinnati police officers over the period of a few years. Then came April 2001.
You took him from his family and his son, and we deserve to know why.
All they needed to do was to grab him. Instead, they decided to shoot him.
No peace!
No justice! The police has given us 3 stories so far today. First, one person killed him, now another person killed him. We don't want to talk about that anymore. We're tired of being tired.
I don't understand why they can't simply release a transcript of what the officer said was his reason.
Don't get me wrong, even when you tell me why, it's not going to make it better. But at least I've been and heard you acknowledge the fact that you took a part of my life from me. So I demand to know why.
Back away! Back away!
We ain't riding, they riding.
When things exploded in 2001, by that time, Charlie Lucan had returned to City Hall as mayor. Both he and the Queen City were quickly thrown into the national spotlight.
It was just a tough time. Cincinnati was getting national and international news about this. I don't mean this metaphor to be flip, but we were the only game in town. So we had every civil rights leader, we had national media, we had the Today Show. I mean, everybody was here. And I think the reputation of the city was seriously in question, and it's not its survival, but its survival as what it has become was really in question for a while, and privately, I worried about it. It touched a lot of people at their core.
Justice! No peace!
I look back on it and I thought, wow, when we have 300 or 400 people signed up to speak at City Hall, I just didn't know how all these emotions were going to come together and we were going to hold together. And somehow I think we did, but we didn't solve everything, but I think we made a good effort. core for me was this policing situation that was the result literally of generations of mistreatment of African Americans by police. And I mean, that's was the initial part of this. It became bigger, it became economic, it became social in many different ways, but for me, at the core of it, that's what it was about. I mean, you really got the feeling that you didn't know where this was all headed. While I was not a fan of the boycott and am not today, I relate to the frustration that makes people look for tools to express their feelings.
Despite the best efforts of people of goodwill in our city, violence on our streets is uncontrolled and it runs rampant. At 10:27 actually this morning, I signed a document declaring a state of emergency in the city of Cincinnati.
I've always tried to be optimistic about the city. It's my home. There were times there when I wasn't that optimistic inside. I mean, I had to put the face on and tried to, but I tell you, my gut, I was fearful for the future of the city.
How about now? Looking forward.
Well, Curtis, I don't think we solved anything particularly, but I do think we put things on a good path. And I have been heartened over 20 years to watch the administrations of Mayor Mallory and Mayor Cranley and the administration, and they've picked up on what happened then, and they've changed it and improved it and made it better. But they've kept, you know, like the collaborative, for example, is still talked about kind of as a Bible of policing, even 20 years later. And I have been heartened by the fact that people still look at it as the basis for improvement in our community. So that makes me optimistic today. And you know, you and I just talked to a couple of police officers, and I got to tell you that I think that they are. It's not just fake. I think that they approach this job as more of communities solving problems together than might, coming in and just kind of overwhelming a situation with force. I always say that, it wasn't that the police at that time were wrong. They just had a perspective of the way to solve a problem was to overwhelm it with force. And now I think there's more of a cooperative.
When Let's Talk Cincy returns, the lessons learned 20 years after the unrest. Much of the work that started back in 2001 still continues today. WLWT News 5's John London has more from many of the people he talked with who were on the front lines back then and who are still there today.
It is sobering to think that it's been a full generation now since that time we all remember back in 2001 when frustrations fueled an explosive moment in our city's history.
Hope for life!
Many of the voices we heard then remain on the front line today. And as we look back, we talk with people in the community about what lessons, if any, we have learned from that very difficult experience and where we stand 20 years later.
So it was just a bad situation, totally mishandled. And that was one of the areas that I said we got to focus on is we got to be transparent. We got to tell people right away, here's what the officer said happened, and we'll do the investigation, and we'll see if what he said happens lines up with the investigation.
State Senator Cecil Thomas, then director of the Human Relations Commission. Thomas is also a former cop of nearly 30 years.
And for the first 3 or 4 days, it did explode, big time. And the only thing I had was an army of ministers and some of their congregations standing between the police on Central Parkway and the folks coming from over around.
One of those ministers, Reverend K.Z. Smith, reflecting on one of Cincinnati's darkest hours and where we stand today.
I think Cincinnati has come a long way. Our police department is not, all that it needs to be, but it's come a long way. It definitely has come a long way, and the Cincinnati Police Department is to be applauded for the changes that have been made. but still, we have to do more, not just here in Cincinnati, but around our nation. But I think it really begins with listening.
Some of the most famous scenes from the riots, I can tell you, I was right there.
FOP President Dan Hills was a sergeant at the time. He's the second most tenured cop on the force, 34 years this July.
There's a lot of people that are invested in telling about how much we've changed and how much better we've got since 2001. I see Cincinnati policemen as pretty much the same as when I started in 1987 till today. Across the board, they're basically good people doing really good work. And sometimes I'm one to oversimplify, but what we learned a lot about was two critical things that you need to do. And you need to communicate better and you need to be more transparent.
Other changes felt directly on the beat.
You can't use your gun for compliance if somebody you pull off, the officer pull you over and you just step out the car and ask, well, hey, officer, what'd I do? You can't no longer pull your gun and say, get back in the car, get back in the car. What are you gonna do, shoot him if you don't get back in the car? We had to stop all that stuff because that's what caused a lot of the frustration to build up that eventually exploded into civil unrest.
Last year, Cincinnati, along with many cities, faced unrest in the streets following the death of George Floyd while being restrained by Minneapolis police. And last year, Cincinnati, along with many cities, faced more profound challenges. So as we look back from 2001 to here, the collaborative agreement, the refresh, the police reforms, most in the community would agree that there has been some progress, but where we stand today, is it enough to ensure that there won't be a repeat of 2001? In Over the Rhine, John London, WLWT News Spot.
Up next, two community leaders on the front line 20 years ago reflect on where we stand today. Two names synonymous with the historic collaborative agreement are Iris Rowley and Reverend Damon Lynch III. Their unique perspective now about where we stand 20 years later and where do we go from here?
We still have a ways to go. We still have some road to travel. And the question becomes now, who leads the charge? Who comes behind us? So we're talking now 20 years ago. I'm 20 years older now. I'm now where my father was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, he was in his 60s. I'm now in my 60s. So I'm excited about hoping and to see that that new group who's going to lead this charge to continue to make our city better and our country better. I'm not optimistic for a revolutionary change. I think change is slow and it's progressive. One of the things my father taught me growing up, he said, if a man can beat you thinking, he'll beat you living every time. That was the wisdom from Damon Lynch Jr. If a man can beat you thinking, he'll beat you living every time. So while we were fighting during the 2000s and getting change in policing and the collaborative agreement, you know what Charlie Lucan was thinking? We're going to get Vine Street. We're going to get Elm Street. And out of your agreement, we'll change some things and we'll give the police some more tools and some more training. And Taser International will get rich because everybody's now going to get tasers. And the camera people are going to get rich because everybody now is going to have body cams. And so we've just made other people extremely wealthy. And we're going to give them some more training. And hopefully you guys will be happy. But we want Vine Street. We want Elm Street. We want Washington Park. The conversation is still the same. If you listen to Dr. King's conversation in his latter years, he was talking about economics. He was talking about the need to build our communities. That is still the final thought.
Feels like 20 years, Curtis, but I think that when something occurs that challenges the work that we've been doing, then it feels like it was yesterday, because the feelings are the same feelings around trauma, the inequities. Just why do we still have to live in such a situation with the systems that taxpayers, one, pay for and participate in crafting. So it's dual, which is, psychotic way to live, because we stay 1 foot in, 1 foot out, waiting for something else to happen when what should happen is the holding accountable of individuals who have the power to create the environment of trauma and pain and suffering to change itself, and to hold itself accountable should be the order of the day in the 21st century. So yeah, what more could one want with extreme power and control over groups of people? And so you question yourself, and you constantly are fighting not to go backwards.
We're going to have to learn how to work together and build. America is now more segregated than it was in 1963 when Dr. King gave his speech. So if that is the case, and this is during his time, it was segregation by law. It's now just segregation by choice. If that's going to be the case, let's make it work. Let's make it work. Let's build our community. Let's educate our kids. Let's provide safe, healthy places, opportunity. And for those of us like myself and you and Iris, who are that, we're on the precipice of, we've got maybe 20 something more years in this thing. Let's go hard. Either go hard or go home.
Up next, from Cincinnati patrol officer 20 years ago to police chief today, Elliot Isaac's perspective when Let's Talk Cincy returns. Cincinnati Police Chief Elliot Isaac reflecting on his climb to the top of the ranks. WLWT News 5's Jatera McGee talked one-on-one with the chief about his thoughts then and now.
I had always heard, coming up, through the ranks that you'll see civil unrest maybe once in a career.
Elliot Isaac had served on Cincinnati's police force for 13 years before the streets of Over the Rhine started to look like a war zone in April 2001.
It was a surreal feeling to see literally hundreds of people angry coming down the street, and seeing that take place it is a very, very unique experience that stays with you for a lifetime.
He was a sergeant assigned to the Internal Investigations Division, acquainted with the facts while grappling with his community's outrage.
We must stand up for truth.
I was definitely disturbed that this was another unarmed young black man that had been involved and had lost his life at the hands of the police.
2 decades later, Isaac is now chief of a department he says has aged well.
Even the fact that I am the police chief in 2001, to see an African American be the police chief was something that seemed to be very, very far off. Just seeing that, a lot has changed.
Including adapting the community policing model and embracing technology. We asked if the chief thinks the city is more united or divided today.
As we've seen this past year, we are very divided politically, more so than I've ever seen, in my adult life. We are united, though, in what people want to see from their police department. I think people are very united in that. They want to see fair and impartial policing.
He says CPD is much closer to that goal than in 2001. The challenge of the last year is convincing the community of that.
But it was peaceful. Thus far, we've not seen any property damage or any violence, so we're very grateful for that.
That in a live interview Friday, May 29th, when protests erupted in Cincinnati days after George Floyd's death.
We're expecting a long weekend ahead. What is your message to the city of Cincinnati tonight as we prepare for what could unfold over the next couple of days?
Express your emotions, express your opinions, express your anger, but keep in mind, this is our city.
Minutes later, glass shattered a few blocks away at the Justice Center.
Protesters just threw a huge placard into the Hamilton County Justice Center.
We were monitoring what was happening nationally. I saw what was happening. I was getting updates from our intelligence platforms that, many other cities were starting to experiencing significant problems. We felt that there was a very strong likelihood that it could happen. I started to see the dynamics of the crowds change.
This time around, Isaac was responsible for the safety of all the officers responding, including his own daughter.
I know my daughter is well trained. She was assigned to one of the platoons. She did, several nights out there, and I knew she would follow her training and do what she was trained to do. But I am also a dad, so you always worry about your kids, and I checked on her once or twice during that time as well.
He says 2020 was harder to wrap his head around.
And that's exactly it. In 2001, they were angry at the Cincinnati Police Department. The citizens and the community, they were angry very specifically as to what took place here in Cincinnati and what had been taking place. In 2020, this was something that happened 600 miles away. Not something that happened very specifically, but they were angry at law enforcement as a whole, with the criminal justice system as a whole. And to see that spill over into worldwide protests.
Many of those protesters, you were the face of all that was wrong.
Yeah.
That's a tough burden to bear.
It is at times, but you can also be the face of helping to heal what is wrong too.
Talking about where we stand today, almost a year after the most recent civil unrest, Isaac told me he's encouraged because many of the changes protesters were calling for, CPD has either already done or is working on. For example, he says banning chokeholds, mental health screenings and hiring, and better training. Jatera McGee, WLWT, News 5.
2 years after the death of Timothy Thomas, the city reached a settlement that totaled $4.5 million. Neither the city or the police admitted any wrongdoing as part of that agreement. In the final analysis, everyone seems to agree a lot of work is still needed as we push for a better day tomorrow. It will not be easy. All we have to do is witness what is happening around the country today. It's going to take all of us working harder and doing more to be the change we want to see. As Adam Clayton Powell would say, keep the faith. Well, that does it for the program today. Thanks for joining us. I hope you can join us next week for another edition of Let's Talk Cincy. Have a nice day.
You took him from his family and his son, and we deserve to know why.
All they needed to do was to grab him. Instead, they decided to shoot him.
No peace! No justice!
The police has given us 3 stories so far today